A very good morning, afternoon, or evening, as the case may be, depending on the country you're based in, and welcome to this webinar on Ultimate Beneficial Ownership, organized by Fintelekt and the Asian Bankers Association. My name is Shirish Pathak. I head Fintelekt, and I will be your host today for this webinar. At the outset, let me thank the Asian Bankers Association for partnering again with us for this webinar. As many of you know by now, in light of the global situation, we have increased our webinar schedule from once a quarter to once a month, and I hope this has added value to ABA members across Asia. I believe the banking industry has indeed found it useful, and we have had more than 600 registrations for today's webinar. Today we have two guest speakers, CHUA Hong, Head of Compliance Solutions APAC at Bureau van Dijk, a Moody's analytics company, and DEBMALYA MAITRA, Senior Director BFSI, Chokshi Group. Both of our speakers are available on LinkedIn, and I would urge you to connect with them after the call should you wish to get any more advice from them. We will attempt to take questions from the audience at the end of the webinar. However, just in case of any technical difficulties, please email your questions to contact@fintelekt.com, and we will try our best to get our guest speakers to answer questions offline for you. Let me introduce our first speaker. So Chun Hong is an experienced compliance professional with over 15 years in the enterprise software solution space. Over these past few years, he has managed business development for enterprise and regulatory software companies. He actively engages with major financial institutions in the Asia-Pac region, helping clients involved in financial crime surveillance and investigations. Chun holds a Bachelor of Business Management from the Singapore Management University. Some of the issues that Chun will cover in his presentation include what really constitutes an ultimate beneficial owner, what are the national security issues with foreign state-owned enterprises. He will also speak about the global economic stimulus and who really are the beneficiaries, and will also cover issues related to trade conspiracy and abuse. Chun, welcome to the webinar and thank you for joining us. May I request you to start your presentation now?
Thank you, Shirish and Fintelekt, for inviting me to be part of this seminar. Today, as part of our topic to explore ultimate beneficial owner, we will explore a little bit more on its relevance and its importance, especially in our current situation today with regards to the macro environment being affected by our COVID-19 situation, right? So we'll also go into topics where we'll see the importance where understanding the ultimate beneficial owners of our client and its counterparties. It's not just a matter of being part of regulatory compliance, but this is also important as part of our nation's fight against financial crime, especially when perpetrators are trying to abuse our financial system today, to get away with proceeds, criminal proceeds. That is from importance to us right now, especially when it comes to our recovery from this economic recovery from this COVID-19 situation. But first, let us look at the definition of what exactly is a ultimate beneficial owner. Different jurisdiction has a slightly different definition. Today, perhaps what we can do is to look at what are the most common understanding that we can see and the most common consensus. All right. So from fact theft, we can see that a lot of this definition is about having a individual with 25% or more of ownership of a company. And in recent times, in the 5th directive from EU, we can also see that having the ability, or rather the power, to control the board decision as one of the definition as well. And perhaps most recently, we can see that from FinCEN, right, there is a new definition where we look at individuals who will benefit the most economically from the board decision. Right, so basically, we're trying to find out who are the individuals who can control, who owns, or who will benefit the most from the corporate decisions. Right, so as the banks responsibility, we have to find out who are these individuals. And many a times when we're trying to find out these individuals, we're also trying to find out the risk behind them, right? So, I'm sure all of us are looking at, who are the PAPs or sanctioned individuals that's related to all these corporate entities. And sometimes in our search for the beneficial owner, we may not find individuals. There are times that we find state-owned enterprises where states are directly involved in the control or in the running of the companies. So perhaps we also ask our questions, why? Why are we looking at PAPs? Or why are we concerned about having state-owned enterprise that's controlling the corporates, right? So when we look at PAPs, it's probably about the same thing. We're looking at if there is a state machinery behind the individual making all this decision, right? Because of its relative high risk, where we look at the risk of bribery and corruption, where decisions might be made to channel funds from state coffers, out of the country as illicit gains, right? So this is one of the reasons why we're doing this. But after understanding the ultimate beneficial owner, it's not just for the sake of it. There is a strong national security interest behind it. Let's explore a little bit on why. We can see that, in this COVID-19 situation, there are different elements and powers that will exploit this chaos to look at, how they can further their own interests. And we can see that, when this situation occurs, a lot of the world's national assets, their share prices are now highly depressed, right? Very undervalued. And what we need to do, right? A lot of the governments of the world are now looking at doubling down to prevent hostile takeovers. We need to protect key infrastructures, right? Such as energy, water, transportation, telecommunications, things that are critical for the country's national security. Now, let's just take a snapshot of looking at the share price of the national telecommunication companies around Asia. We can see that, during this heightened, the most critical time of the COVID-19 situation, a lot of the share price around Asia has dropped around the same time, right? A time period. And we can see a bit of recovery, but during those critical times, the shares were all undervalued. And what we need to do, right? Why is this important now? It's because companies around the world needs to now understand this, right? The governments around the world wants to protect their critical infrastructure. And during this time is when different elements will come in and try to take over the critical infrastructure now, right? Where the prices are low. So as banks that's involved in a lot of this merger acquisition or takeovers or transactions, it's imperative then we understand who are the counterparties doing this and who are the beneficial owners behind them, right? Is this a pure transaction of corporate interests, of commercial interests, or are there foreign elements within this? So now we bring back to the previous definition, right? So it's important to understand then, are there state machineries behind the beneficial owner that's driving such decisions? Let's look around the world, right? We can see that, in Asia, we have the most, perhaps, foreign state-owned enterprise or state-invested enterprise. Meaning which, when we are dealing with transactions, there are more than 300,000 companies out there, right? They are state-owned and state-invested. So these are the more obvious ones, right? And if we look at OFAC 50% sanctioned by extension rule, there could be even more by looking for the extension of their subsidiaries or parent companies. So there is a lot of risk when we're dealing with such national security. So it's something that we really need to be watching out for, especially when it comes to transaction that's got to do with our national security. Next, we also explore about our national interest right now, right? Because in this stage where our governments are trying to announce different stimulus package to help our own economies to recover. Now, the last thing we want to do is to allow for criminal elements or foreign elements to abuse this. Right? Government around the world are now launching different stimulus package to kickstart the economy. What we want is for these funds to be channeled to the right parties. And a lot of the channels that governments are using nowadays are through the banks, right? Through low interest loans or even sometimes interest-free loans for SMEs, for different companies to tide through this difficult period, to prevent layoffs, to prevent large unemployment. And we want to benefit the companies who are locally registered, who have been paying their taxes. So the banks that involve, financial institutions involved in this, needs to be very clear who are then their clients. There is now the beneficial owners of the package. We can see that now there are many companies, or rather many governments around the world, including EU or Asia, where they are looking to block funds, or rather block firms registered in such tax havens from receiving such state aids. And this is important, right? So if as the financial institution that is as a channel to distribute the various state aids, we then need to know who are the beneficial owners then and where it's being registered, so that we know the government's aids can help where it's most required, right? Which is with the SMEs. They're producing the GDP to support the economy, and they're supporting the employment of the countries. So let me give an example why this is very important, right? If we look at typical company structure, if we don't go deep into its corporate structure, we may never know who are the beneficial owners or shareholders that's behind it, right? So what we want is to be able to have the visibility on who will benefit most from stimulus packages and tax breaks, right? As we said, we want to reap the most benefits for the people. So financial institutions must understand this. Just an example for this company that we brought up. It's seemingly a Chinese company, right? So a Chinese registered company on its front. Now, example, if the Chinese government were to produce state aids and interest-free loans to benefit this, they would want naturally the Chinese population to be the beneficiary. But if we explore deeper, we can see that there are corporates and individuals behind this that are from non-Chinese registered places, right? So it brings to mind then, who will then benefit the most from this stimulus package, right? So it's very important then we understand the whole entire corporate structure and ownership from our clients. So this must be done very clearly during the onboarding phase, as well as during the phase where we're doing such transactions. Now, as we said, this is unprecedented times. Now we're doing trades with different countries around the world to get medical equipment and supplies. It's then easy, we can see, for illegal elements to launder their illegal proceeds then. Right? We've seen companies that are charged with fraud over multi-million-dollar medical equipment. Right? So there are a lot of abuse of this. And what they do is they try to launder all these illegal proceeds from that country. So as banks, when we're dealing with such international trades and correspondence banking, it is also the responsibility to then now understand who are the counterparties in this trade. Whether are there any illegal elements or fraudulent company that are trying to defraud this, where then proceeds will be then transferred out of the country through an abuse of the financial systems. And through such correspondence banking or trade financing, we can see that a lot of times the banks actually depend on each other to do its due diligence on their client to understand who are the beneficial owners. But in such transaction, it's difficult for them to then now know who are the UBOs of their counterparty. So who exactly is on the other side? This is a big challenge that we can see. And we can see that now in all this high-risk cross-border international transaction, as part of the correspondent banking business, there are enforcements that are happening. We can see that Danske Bank, through its Estonian branch, have dealt with very high-risk transactions, onboarded high-risk clients from Russia, and through its correspondence banking network, this illicit funds has found its way into US, and now the Department of Justice is also looking at, unfortunately, Deutsche Bank in its role in doing its settlement and processing. So no doubt, just doing a Wolfsburg questionnaire on your correspondent bank is no longer adequate. You need to supplement this by also understanding the risk of your counterparty. Right? You need to understand who are the beneficial owners from the originator of the funds to its beneficiaries. Now, as we approach this, we look at typically there are incremental steps that banks are taking, right, throughout the years. The first steps of understanding the beneficial owners, we can see usually you need to start to screen for PEPs and sanction, and this is usually done very well in the retail banks. So I believe actually most of the banks have done it today. Now the next step, where it's more relevant to us today, is then to discover and screen for the directors and the shareholders and the ultimate beneficial owners behind the corporate. And we need to understand are there PEPs and sanction parties involved, right? So we started with the greatest risk of largest volume. Now we're looking at the risk of our corporate clients with its largest value, right? We need to do this. And as a next stage, we should create risk-based approach for the bank during the onboarding, as well as transaction. Right? Why is it important? It's because then you will be able to find out if the counterparty to your clients, who are the beneficial owners behind it, and what are the risks that's involved as well. Right? So we take incremental steps into understanding our risk. Just an example, Again, why it's important to know your customers' customers, and why we need to understand the UBOs behind the different counterparties from the example I brought up earlier, is then because you will find out different scenarios, right? Different typology. And one of them could be, are there any affiliated parties that's involved in this transaction? Right? We must understand that typically in a money laundering scenario where perpetrators are trying to funnel their money from one jurisdiction to another, they're typically affiliated parties where they're in cahoots, so that when you transfer the illicit funds, the money is actually still belonging to affiliated parties or the same person. So it's very important then for us to understand who are the counterparties UBO behind it, right? And to go deeper in it, we should also understand who are the shareholders and the directors involved. Now, in summary, right, when we talk about all the different typologies and scenarios involved, in summary, data can help to prevent the financial crime that's involved. That's very close to our hearts, right? So BVD has the unique capability where we can help frontline financial institution in understanding the UBO, especially when it's cross-border in your risk assessment, where we can help the banks look at who are the counterparties and the UBO within all the entire transactions, right? And finally, it's also a matter of national policy, because in the very scenario that I mentioned, a lot of banks are involved in the channel of the stimulus package. Then you'll be able to identify which are the companies that's most eligible for all this stimulus package, where then it helps to advance the various national interests and to help the people within the country. All right, with this, I end my presentation. I'm happy to take any questions if you have any. Thank you very much.
CHOON, thank you for the presentation. CHOON will join us again later during the question and answer session, so you may keep your questions ready for him meanwhile. Our next speaker is DEBMALYA MAITRA, Senior Director BFSI at the Chokshi Group. DEBMALYA is a seasoned professional with more than 29 years of experience in banking and financial services, constituting over a decade each in new age private sector banks and life insurance companies, and 7 years in a leading housing finance company. He is a chartered accountant and holds a bachelor's in commerce degree with honors in accountancy. He was also a member of the insurance delegation in the FATF evaluation related to preparedness regarding AML regulations in India. DILIGENCE is also one of the member governors of the Institute of Internal Auditors Mumbai chapter since 2015. Some of the key issues that DEBMALYA will cover in his presentation include legal structure and components, misuse of corporate entities for illicit purposes, again, what are the characteristics of a beneficial owner, some of the important FATF guidelines, common methods of misuse and red flag indicators that banks should be aware of, and customer due diligence process and sources of information. Dave, welcome to the webinar, and maybe have your presentation now, please.
Today, we will discuss the trends and developments relating to ultimate beneficial ownership, or UBO as we call it normally. UBO has become a major concern for AML safety regulators and practitioners across the world. Ensuring an effective system of gathering information has been a challenge for the bankers and other people in the financial institutions in the past. If you look at the legal structures and components, the legal structures can be broken up into two major parts: legal persons and legal arrangements. Legal persons indicate basically the business entities like companies and LLPs, while legal arrangements are organizations which are managing charity, hospital, education institutions. In other words, the not-for-profit ventures. Now, when we look at determining an UBO, it is like peeling an onion. We have to test each level to determine who is the beneficial owner or who controls the entity. So we have the legal entity at the top. Then we look for who's the managing the entity. That will be the board of directors and the top management of that entity. Then further we look for who are the registered shareholders of the entity. And ultimately we have to look for who is actually controlling this organization. It is very important for us to understand that it is not a one-step solution. We have to go through several steps to determine the UBO. Now, any information which is not accurate, adequate or timely is of no use to us. And that is the same so far as information relating to UBO is concerned. Any delay of such information helps in disguising the identity of the beneficial owner, ascertaining the actual purpose and source and use of funds. Also, by the time you realize, a major part of the money could have already been withdrawn or transferred into another entity. If you look at the characteristics of a beneficial owner, he must be a natural person. This person should benefit from the enterprise, transaction, funds, and or the controls of the same. There must be an element of benefit or control, which is very important for us. If I do not have any such interest, why should we try to have a beneficial owner there? The legal entity could be operating in multiple geographies. Now, this is a possibility. It is not necessary that it will always operate in multiple geographies, but we have seen there are a large number of cases where the legal entity operates in multiple geographies and the actual beneficial owner is stationed in some other geography as well. Ultimate ownership controls need to be determined in situations in which ownership control is exercised by chain of ownership or by means of control other than direct control, which means if we see there is a chain of ownership, we need to go right to the bottom of it to find out and determine who is the beneficial owner. It is also noted that in case it's a listed company, then the requirement of finding the beneficial owner has been relaxed by all the regulations. We'll now look into this role of specialist and professional intermediaries. The three major types of intermediaries here are trust and company service providers, or commonly known as TCSPs, the legal professionals and the accounting professionals. In large number of jurisdictions, it has been noted that these entities are not regulated under AML CFT guidelines. Service providers provide various kinds of services, including registering companies, opening and operating bank accounts, purchasing and managing property, and provide other operational compliance related services of the owners and the controllers. Therefore, they become, sometimes unwittingly, a screen behind which a criminal can hide. A lack of regulations for intermediaries is again a major area of concern for us. And also we have something called the lawyer's privilege, in which case the lawyer has a privilege so far as the client's information is concerned. This definitely helps in obscuring the information. FATF and Egmont Group conducted a global study on 106 cases in July 2018. So, what are the major findings in this study? Beneficial owners conceal their identity, but they are likely to exercise some control by a combination of direct and indirect channels, which means even if I am going to hide, since I am wanting something out of this venture, I try to control it in some manner. Use of nominees or strawmen is very common. Strawman is someone who is often an imaginary person who is used to hide an illegal or a secret activity. This is taken out of a dictionary meaning. That means somebody who is enough and behind whom the BO can hide. Specialist and professional intermediaries used in most cases and in almost half of these cases are unwittingly drawn in and exploited by the criminals, which means while most of these transactions involve some kind of a specialist and professional intermediary, at least half of them are drawn in and exploited by the criminals because they are not aware of the risks associated with such transactions. In only 4 of these 106 cases, these were reported as suspicious activity, and that too, these were where the intermediaries are regulated. FATF then further conducted a study in October 19, and it came to a conclusion that 60% of the countries assessed have inadequate system regarding capturing up-to-date information data on beneficial ownership. This, as we go along, we'll see is a major concern because this data may not be easily available in any of the countries. A major area of weakness identified was relating to obtaining beneficial ownership of foreign entities. Now, in case of foreign entities, the issue becomes even more complex as this data is not easily available to a bank or a local financial institution operating in that country. It needs the help of the government to find out such details. Further, the FATF plenary session held in February 2020 reviewed the state of compliance in the Republic of Korea and UAE. In both cases, it observed that they need to focus on misuse, abuse of legal persons as one of their areas of improvement. So therefore, it is clear that it is not only developing countries, also in developed countries, the regulation and the other facilities are still not conducive enough to provide all these details. The common methods of misuse are a shell company, shelf company, front company, complex ownership and control structures, bearer shares and bearer share warrants, unrestricted use of legal persons and directors, undisclosed identity of shareholders and director nomination, informal nominee shareholders and directors, trusts and other legal arrangements, and use of intermediaries. One or above or more than one of these could be used actually by a beneficial owner to obscure the transaction. Now, what is a shell company? Shell company is a legal vehicle. It could be a partnership, it could be a company. Typically, it has no physical presence other than a mailing address, generates little or economic value, so therefore basically no business of their own, and not illegal, and can have a legitimate business purpose. Basically, this is a clause which is used by the criminals to hide behind it by acquiring such companies and using it as a vehicle. Commonly used to facilitate illicit activity, including ML and tax evasion. A shelf company is a form of shell company which is registered and kept ready for off-the-shelf purchase, while front companies are generally legal front behind which some criminals like to operate. In items number 7, 8 and 9, you can see the use of straw persons is very common. The common red flag indicators in this regard are transactions are not economically justified, considering the account holder's business or profession, or inconsistent with the normal activity or without business rationale. Use of funds by non-profit organizations which are not consistent with the purpose for which they are established. Multiple deposits, cash transactions structured just below the reporting level or apparently with no business logic. Frequent wire transfers, cash activities to and from foreign countries. Logging in or banking from areas close to conflict zones. Example is Syrian border. So the transaction are from countries identified as high-risk countries and funds are being generated and transferred to such countries. Customers insisting on anonymity, reluctance to provide identifying information or providing minimal, seemingly fictitious or false information, and ultimately adverse press and high-risk countries which we have mentioned earlier are normally low on compliance requirements and are therefore preferred by criminals for illicit activities, fictitious information, and could include identity theft, wherein an identity of an unsuspecting person can be misused. Any adverse media report we have seen earlier also is a major clue for us to find something wrong with the entity. Now let us look at what are the process and how we can do customer due diligence and what are the sources of information available to us. The primary source of information is obviously declaration from the company and updates from the company from time to time, company or any other organization. However, if you look at what are the independent sources, then those are for companies, register of companies or Department of Company Affairs, tax authorities and various licensing authorities. For partnerships including LFPs, register of firms or companies, tax authorities and licensing authorities. For association of persons and societies, register of societies, charitable organizations and tax authorities. Trusts, the register of trusts, the charity offices in case again of charitable trusts and tax authorities. However, some of these data may not be easily available, like the tax authorities do not normally share their data, while others may not be updated adequately or recent information may not be available. In some of our countries, the register for trusts and societies are governed by acts which are very old and they do not contain the required information. So further, in case of association of persons, we need to also verify the copy of specific permission which the government has granted them to operate, especially when they are receiving foreign aid. This is very important. In case of foreign entity, permission to operate in this country, and periodic updates needs to be done based on the risk profile assigned. In case where there is an adverse news item published, immediately the risk profile needs to be reworked upon. This periodic review of the risk profile is very important. We may not get all the information required in one go, and there may be changes in the organization which we need to keep on tracking. So if we think that once we have got all the information required, then that is not correct. The information is dynamic. So we need to keep on collecting updated information and it out, maybe based on transaction pattern. We need to look at that very carefully. Customer due diligence process further. So we have to conduct regular due diligence for the legal persons to determine whether their registration, identity, domicile and nature of business. So what kind of business we are allowing, that's important. Determine the risk profile of the entity depending on the local factors. This is something which you have to work out yourself based on the risk appetite of your organization. Obtain necessary details from the company along with declarations from responsible officials on correctness of data and in case there is a material change in the above data. Again, very important, people must be held accountable for it. People cannot just go away by giving any data, they have to authenticate it. In case of involvement of any PEP, then we have to conduct detailed due diligence about him and his role in the entity, also whether any of his relatives or other close associates are involved. Verify the data submitted to the extent possible from government registered and public databases. So not all the data you can check, but try to check for the key data and see okay, whatever has been said by the organization is matching with the database available in public. Set up a mechanism to review any news item available in public domain, newspaper, websites indicating any change in the work. Because sometimes a newspaper might come in a very small local paper which be not in your attention. So you need to have a system wherein you scan all newspapers and you get the relevant information about that particular organization. This declaration, as we have mentioned above, is a very good way to start obtaining information. We can get it from external source wherever possible, and if we get any discrepancy, then it is very important that we call the responsible persons from that organization and ask them to explain the reasons for this discrepancy. And one must satisfy oneself before allowing transaction in such accounts. Risk mitigation measures. So the first and most important thing is the FIUs must have the largest range of information. because that can help others get this information. Registries on beneficial ownership in all countries and adequately resourced. A very important word. I can create a registry, but if I don't put good people in it to actually look for the information, the whole information can become quite useless. Improve quality and timelines of sharing information, including transaction network between FIUs, registries, and all concerned parties. I think somewhere there has to be a cooperation between all the countries, all the entities which are working together, so that such organizations can't take benefit of compartmentalization or not sharing information between various organizations. Articulate vulnerabilities regarding legal persons, legal arrangements, intermediaries for both domestic and foreign cases. Define role and responsibility of nominees to limit their misuse. Again, very important. Nominees should be made responsible so that they are aware that if they do something to hide information, they can be liable in the laws of the land. Regulate professional intermediaries and create adequate awareness among them. It's not only important that they be regulated, it's important that they be told what are the risks that they are facing so that they can look for those risks when they are actually sourcing a client. Prevent misuse of legal professional privilege and provide enhanced guidance and training to legal professionals. Again, very important. If there is something for criminal activity, then such professional privilege cannot hide information from the required people. To conclude, we must say that government has to play a major part in this effort, first in collection and dissemination of information, especially where a foreign entity is involved, regulating and training professional intermediaries. Banks and FIs have to go ahead and keep evaluating a customer with the information available from concerned entities, third parties dealing with these entities, and unregulated informal sources, including media reports. Because you cannot wait for something to break out to find out that there is a problem in this account. So, as a bank and FI, it is your primary concern to keep looking for such information, keep reviewing an account where you feel there is any doubt. Thank
Thanks to all of you for patiently listening in, and thanks to DEBMALYA and CHOON for sharing their insights with us. I hope this webinar has been useful, and we look forward to bringing you the next one on the 8th, again with the Asian Bankers Association. Also, I'd like to announce to all of you that the Fintelekt Asia AML CFT Summit will take place virtually this year. It will be from the 20th of July to the 24th of July for an entire week over 5 working days, Monday to Friday, where we will have the sessions for 3 hours every day. More than 20 presentations, global speakers, and I'm sure many of you will find it interesting. I'm sure many of you would have already seen this on our website, but for those of you who haven't, please take a look at fintelekt.com, and you can register free for the Asia Summit. In closing, let me also thank Ernest Lin, Amador Henrado, and Mig Moreno of the Asian Bankers Association, our partners, and my team members at Fintelekt for putting this webinar together. So everyone have a great day ahead, and we look forward to seeing you online again soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Shirish, for hosting this wonderful session.
Thanks, Dave. Bye.